The rain hammered against the tall windows of the Sterling Room, one of downtown Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the dinner service was winding down. Only 3 tables remained occupied in the dimly lit dining room, where crystal chandeliers cast warm pools of light over white tablecloths and polished silverware. Grace Williams moved between the tables with practiced invisibility. At 42 years old, she had mastered the art of being present yet unseen, a skill honed over 15 years of working in high-end establishments where wealthy patrons preferred their service silent and efficient. Her dark hands moved swiftly as she cleared plates, refilled water glasses, and reset tables, her movements so fluid they barely registered in the peripheral vision of the diners. She had learned early on that in places like this, being black and wearing a service uniform made you functionally invisible to most customers. They didn't see Grace Williams, the woman who took night classes twice a week trying to finish her degree. They didn't see the single mother who worked double shifts to keep her daughter in a decent school district. They saw the help, a category, not a person. Grace had made peace with that years ago, mostly. At table 7, near the far corner by the window overlooking Michigan Avenue, sat a young man who had been dining alone for the past hour and a half. Grace had noticed him immediately when he arrived. It was hard not to. He was perhaps in his late 20s, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, with dark hair styled in that carefully casual way that required expensive barbers. His watch caught the light every time he lifted his wine glass. A Patek Philippe, if she wasn't mistaken. She'd learned to recognize luxury brands after years in this world, but it wasn't his obvious wealth that had caught her attention. It was the way he ate. Most wealthy young men who dined alone at the Sterling Room were either on their phones the entire time, or treating the meal as a performance, posturing for the servers, making a show of their wine knowledge, leaving ostentatious tips to demonstrate their generosity. This man did none of that. He ate slowly, deliberately, as if he were alone in the universe. He barely looked up from his plate. When she'd taken his order, he'd spoken in a low, measured voice, making direct eye contact for exactly 2 seconds before returning his gaze to the menu. There was something methodical about him that unsettled her, though she couldn't put her finger on why. Now, as Grace approached the kitchen with a tray of dirty dishes, she saw through the service window that the young man had finished his meal. His plate was clean, the wine glass empty. He sat perfectly still, hands folded on the table, staring at the rain-streaked window. "Table 7's done," called out Marcus, the floor manager, catching Grace as she emerged from the kitchen. "Can you clear it? I need to close out his check." "On it," Grace replied, grabbing a fresh service tray. As she approached table 7, the young man stood abruptly, smoothing his suit jacket. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out a small handful of coins, and placed them deliberately in the center of the table beside his empty wine glass. Grace's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. After a $300 meal, she'd seen the check. He was leaving coins, not even dollar bills. Coins. She'd experienced this before, of course. The casual disrespect of customers who left insultingly small tips, or worse, nothing at all. But there was something different about this. The coins weren't scattered carelessly, they were stacked. 4 quarters, 3 dimes, 2 nickels, arranged in a small, neat pyramid. If you're finding this story intriguing, please consider subscribing to our channel. We're just getting started, and your support helps us bring you more compelling stories like this one. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. The young man walked past Grace without a word, without a glance, as if she were furniture. She heard his footsteps echo across the hardwood floor, heard the soft chime as he pushed through the brass revolving door, and then he was gone, swallowed by the rain and the Chicago night. Grace stood motionless for a moment, staring at the table. The anger she felt was familiar, a dull, worn thing she'd learned to swallow down years ago. She took a breath, set down her tray, and began clearing the table mechanically. Wine glass, dinner plate, dessert fork, napkin. Then she reached for the coins. As her fingers touched the small stack, she noticed something odd. The placemat, a thick, textured rectangle of burgundy fabric that sat beneath the entire place setting, was slightly askew. Not much, maybe a 1/4 inch. But Grace knew these tables. She'd set hundreds of them. The placemats were always perfectly aligned with the edge of the table. Someone had moved it. She glanced around the dining room. The other 2 occupied tables were on the far side, their diners absorbed in conversation. Marcus was at the host's stand, reviewing tomorrow's reservations. No one was watching her. Grace hesitated, her hand hovering over the placemat. A small voice in her head told her to just take the coins, clear the table, and move on. It was probably nothing. Maybe the busboy had bumped it earlier. Maybe the customer had shifted it while eating. But something nagged at her. The way the coins were stacked, the way the placemat was displaced by such a precise amount, the way the man had left without looking back, without asking for his check, as if he'd finished some task and departed exactly as planned. Her fingers gripped the edge of the placemat. She lifted it. Underneath, pressed flat against the white tablecloth, was a small white card, business card sized, maybe slightly smaller. Face down, Grace's heart rate picked up. She looked around again, suddenly feeling exposed, as if she were doing something wrong. But the dining room remained quiet, oblivious. With careful fingers, she flipped the card over. It was blank except for 7 words printed in small, precise black letters. "Turn around, don't make a scene." Grace's blood went cold. Her hands began to tremble. Every instinct screamed at her to drop the card, to walk away, to pretend she'd never seen it. But her body betrayed her. Her head turned slowly, looking over her shoulder toward the entrance. The young man stood just inside the revolving door, water dripping from his shoulders, his dark eyes fixed directly on her. He hadn't left at all. He'd been waiting, watching to see if she would lift the placemat. For the first time since he'd entered the restaurant, he smiled. It was not a kind smile. Grace's mouth went dry. The card felt like it was burning in her hand. Around them, the restaurant continued its quiet evening rhythm, glasses clinking, soft conversations, the gentle jazz playing through hidden speakers. No one else seemed to notice that anything was wrong. The young man took a single step forward, then the kitchen door swung open, and Marcus's voice called out, "Grace, chef needs you for a second." The spell broke. Grace's eyes snapped away from the young man, her professional instincts kicking in. "Coming," she managed, her voice only slightly strained. When she looked back toward the entrance, the revolving door was still spinning slowly. The young man was gone again, but this time she knew he'd be back. Grace's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she pushed through the kitchen door. The card was still clutched in her palm, the edges cutting into her skin. Behind her, the dining room felt suddenly vast and dangerous, as if the walls had expanded and the shadows had grown teeth. "Grace, you okay?" Marcus stood by the prep station, his brow furrowed with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." She forced herself to breathe. "I'm fine. Just tired. Long shift." It was a lie, and from the way Marcus studied her face, he knew it. But he didn't push. That was one thing she appreciated about working at the Sterling Room. The management didn't pry into the lives of the service staff. As long as you did your job and kept the customers happy, your personal struggles remained your own. "Chef wanted to know if we're out of the black truffle oil," Marcus said, glancing back toward the line cooks. "Can you check the storage?" Grace nodded, grateful for anything to do with her hands besides hold that cursed card. She moved mechanically toward the storage room at the back of the kitchen, her mind racing. What just happened? Who was that man? Why had he left the card? And most importantly, what did he want from her? The storage room was cool and dark, lined with industrial shelving stocked with ingredients, linens, and supplies. Grace flipped on the light and stood there for a moment alone, finally allowing herself to look at the card again. "Turn around. Don't make a scene." The words were simple, direct, almost clinical. Not a threat exactly, more like instructions. As if he'd expected her to find the card, as if he'd wanted her to find it. But why? Grace thought back to the coins he'd left. 4 quarters, 3 dimes, 2 nickels, $1.40 for a $300 meal. The insult had been deliberate. She understood that now. It wasn't about the money at all. It was about seeing whether she would look beneath the obvious, whether she would lift the placemat. He'd been testing her. The realization sent a chill down her spine. This wasn't random. This was planned, calculated. The man had come to the Sterling Room tonight specifically to what? To find her? To give her this card? No, that didn't make sense. He couldn't have known she'd be working tonight. Could he? Grace's mind spun through possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. She barely registered the sound of footsteps approaching until a voice spoke from the doorway. "Did you find the truffle oil?" She spun around, her heart hammering. It was just Marcus leaning against the doorframe, his expression still concerned. "Sorry," Grace said quickly, scanning the shelves. "Yeah, here." She grabbed a bottle and handed it to him. hoping he didn't notice how badly her hands were trembling. Marcus took the bottle but didn't leave. "Grace, seriously, are you all right? You've been off all night." She wanted to tell him. Wanted to show him the card, to ask what he thought, to get someone else involved so she wouldn't feel so alone with this strange, creeping dread. But something stopped her. The card's instructions echoed in her mind. Don't make a scene. What if making a scene, telling Marcus, calling the police, causing a disturbance, was exactly what the man didn't want? And if she did the opposite of what he wanted, what would happen? "I'm fine," she repeated, forcing a smile. "Just a headache. I'll take something when I get home." Marcus didn't look convinced, but he nodded slowly. "All right. Well, we're almost done for the night anyway. Just table 3 left, and they're asking for the check. Why don't you finish up table 7 and then start your closing duties?" Table 7, where the card had been hidden, where the man with the cold smile had stood watching her. "Sure," Grace said. "I'll get right on it." She waited until Marcus left before allowing herself to breathe again. Then she slipped the card into her apron pocket, grabbed a clean service tray, and headed back out to the dining room. The restaurant felt different now. Every shadow seemed to hide something. Every sound made her flinch. As she approached table 7, she half expected to see the young man sitting there again, smiling that terrible smile. But the table was empty, just the coins, still stacked in their neat pyramid. The placemat, now slightly rumpled from where she'd lifted it. The wine glass with its faint lipstick stain. No, wait. The man hadn't been wearing lipstick. Had someone else sat at this table earlier? Grace frowned, looking closer. No, she was losing it. She'd seen the man drink from that glass. It must have been a smudge, a trick of the light. She cleared the table quickly, efficiently, pocketing the $1 and 40 in coins with bitter irony. And as she wiped down the surface, she noticed something else. A faint residue on the tablecloth where the card had been hidden. She touched it with her finger, slightly sticky. Deliberate. He'd adhered the card to the underside of the placemat with something. Double-sided tape, maybe, or adhesive dots. Which meant he'd brought materials with him. Had prepared for this. The planning involved made her stomach turn. Grace finished clearing and headed back toward the kitchen, balancing the tray on her shoulder. Through the tall windows, she could see Michigan Avenue stretching into the rainy night. Headlights reflecting off wet pavement, pedestrians hurrying past under umbrellas. And there, across the street, standing perfectly still beneath the awning of a closed boutique, was the young man. He was looking directly at the restaurant, directly at her. Grace's breath caught. The tray wobbled dangerously on her shoulder. She steadied it, forcing herself to keep walking, to not react, to not give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. But her mind was screaming. She pushed through the kitchen door, set down the tray with a clatter that made one of the line cooks glance over, and moved immediately to the small window that looked out onto the alley behind the restaurant. Her hands gripped the metal frame as she peered out into the darkness. Nothing. Just dumpsters, the fire escape, the dim glow of the security light. "Grace, you're freaking me out." It was Yolanda, one of the other servers, a woman in her 50s who'd worked at the Sterling Room even longer than Grace. "What's going on?" Grace turned to face her, words catching in her throat. Yolanda's kind, weathered face showed genuine concern. They'd worked together for years. Covered each other's shifts, shared complaints about difficult customers over cigarettes in the alley. "There's a man," Grace began, then stopped. How could she explain this without sounding paranoid, without sounding crazy? "A customer?" Yolanda prompted. "He left something. A card. I think he's watching me." Yolanda's expression hardened immediately. She'd dealt with her share of creeps over the years. They all had. "Did he threaten you? Touch you?" "No, nothing like that. He just left this card under a placemat, with instructions. And when I looked up, he was standing there, watching to see if I'd found it." "What kind of instructions?" Grace pulled the card from her apron pocket and handed it to Yolanda. The older woman read it, her face darkening. "Grace, this is not okay. We need to tell Marcus, maybe call the police." "No." The word came out sharper than Grace intended. She lowered her voice. "No, I mean, what would I tell them? A customer left me a note? He didn't threaten me. He didn't do anything illegal. He's stalking you. Standing outside the restaurant watching you is stalking. Is it, or is he just standing there on a public street?" Grace hated how weak her argument sounded, but the man's words kept echoing in her mind. Don't make a scene. What if calling the police is exactly what he wants? What if this is some kind of test? Yolanda handed back the card, her expression troubled. "Test for what?" "Grace, listen to yourself. Listen to This man is playing games with you and you're letting him. Was she? Grace didn't know anymore. Everything felt surreal, like she'd stepped sideways into a different version of reality, where the normal rules didn't apply. Let me at least walk you to your car tonight, Yolanda insisted. Safety in numbers. Grace nodded gratefully. Thank you. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur. Grace went through her closing duties on autopilot, restocking napkins, polishing silverware, setting up tables for tomorrow's lunch service. Every few minutes, she found excuses to glance out the window toward Michigan Avenue. The man was gone now. The awning across the street stood empty, but Grace couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching, still waiting. At 10:47 p.m. she clocked out. The rain had intensified, drumming against the windows with renewed fury. Grace pulled on her jacket, a thin windbreaker that did almost nothing against Chicago's November chill, and met Yolanda by the staff exit. Ready? Yolanda asked, buttoning her own coat. Ready. They stepped out into the alley together. The security light cast long shadows across the wet pavement. Grace's car was parked 3 blocks away in a public lot. Employee parking at the Sterling Room was non-existent, one of the many small indignities of the job. The two women walked in silence, their footsteps echoing off the brick buildings. The city felt different at night, especially in the rain. Emptier, more dangerous. Grace found herself looking over her shoulder every few steps, scanning doorways and shadows. You're really spooked, Yolanda observed quietly. Wouldn't you be? Yeah, Yolanda admitted. I would. They reached the parking lot. Grace's car, a 12-year-old Honda Civic with a dented bumper and a passenger window that didn't roll down anymore, sat in its usual spot near the back. She dug her keys out of her purse, hands still unsteady. Lock your doors, Yolanda instructed. Text me when you get home. I will. Thank you, Yolanda, really. The older woman squeezed her shoulder. We look out for each other, honey. That's what we do. Grace climbed into her car, immediately hitting the lock button. Through the rain-streaked windshield, she watched Yolanda walk to her own vehicle 3 rows over. The engine turned over on the second try, a small mercy, and Grace cranked up the heat even though it would take 10 minutes to warm up. She sat there for a moment, letting her heart rate slow, trying to convince herself that this was over. The man had played his weird game, she'd found his card, and now it was done. Tomorrow she'd laugh about how paranoid she'd been. Tomorrow this would just be a strange story to tell. Grace put the car in reverse and began backing out of the space. That's when she saw it. Tucked under her windshield wiper, fluttering in the wind and rain, was another card. Identical white cardstock, identical size. Grace's hands locked on the steering wheel. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. She could drive away, just turn on the wipers, let the card fly off into the night, and pretend she'd never seen it. But she knew she wouldn't. With shaking hands, she put the car in park, turned off the engine, and stepped back out into the rain. Water immediately soaked through her hair, running down her face as she reached for the card. It was sealed in a clear plastic sleeve to protect it from the weather. He'd thought of everything. Grace pulled it free from the wiper blade and read the message. 123. West Randolph, midnight, come alone, bring the coins. Below the address in smaller letters, your daughter's name is Maya. She's 11. She goes to Lincoln Elementary. The card slipped from Grace's fingers and fell into a puddle at her feet. He knew about Maya. Grace didn't remember getting back into her car, didn't remember locking the doors or starting the engine. The next thing she knew, she was sitting in the parking lot with the heat blasting, her wet hair dripping onto her shoulders, staring at the card she'd fished out of the puddle. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. Maya. He knew about Maya. Her daughter's name, her age, her school. Information that wasn't public. Information that required deliberate searching, deliberate watching. How long had this man been following her? How many times had he watched Grace drop Maya off at school? How many times had he stood outside Lincoln Elementary, watching an 11-year-old girl who had no idea she was being observed? The thought made Grace's stomach heave. She fumbled for the door handle, pushed it open, and vomited onto the wet pavement. Once, twice. Her whole body shook with the force of it. When there was nothing left, she sat back, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. The rain continued to pour, washing away the evidence. Across the parking lot, Yolanda's taillights disappeared around the corner. Grace was alone. She looked at the card again. 123 West Randolph, midnight. Come alone. Bring the coins. It was 10:52 p.m. She had 68 minutes to decide. Grace's first instinct was to call the police. This was a threat. This was stalking. This was exactly the kind of situation where you called 911 and let professionals handle it. But even as her fingers moved toward her phone, doubt crept in. What would she tell them? That a customer had left her notes? That he was standing on a public street? That he wanted to meet her at an address? They'd ask if he'd threatened her directly, if he'd touched her, if he'd made any explicit demands. And what could she say? No, officer. He just left cryptic messages and mentioned my daughter's name. Yes, officer, that's terrifying, but no. He didn't actually threaten to hurt her. No, he didn't ask for money. No, I don't know what he wants. Grace had lived in Chicago long enough to know how these things went. The police were overworked and underfunded. Unless there was clear and present danger, unless something had already happened, they'd take a report and tell her to be careful. Maybe increase patrols around her building for a few days. Maybe. And what if that made things worse? What if the man was watching right now, waiting to see what she'd do? What if involving the police was the wrong move? Don't make a scene. Grace pulled out her phone anyway. But instead of calling 911, she called her mother. Baby? Her mother's voice was thick with sleep. What's wrong? It's almost 11. Mama, I need you to do something for me. Grace fought to keep her voice steady. I need you to go check on Maya. Right now. What? Grace, she's asleep. Please, Mama. Just go look in her room. Make sure she's there. Make sure she's okay. There was a long pause. Her mother knew better than to ask questions when Grace used that tone. Hold on. Grace listened to the rustling sounds of her mother getting out of bed, footsteps padding down the hallway of the small house they shared on the south side. The house Grace had grown up in. The house she'd returned to after Maya's father left, pregnant and terrified, wondering how she'd manage alone. Her mother had never asked for rent, had never complained about the cramped space or the way Maya's toys spread throughout every room, had simply opened her arms and said, "Family takes care of family." More footsteps. The creak of Maya's door opening. "She's here," her mother said finally, fast asleep, clutching that stuffed rabbit you won her at the carnival. "Grace, what's going on?" Relief flooded through Grace so intensely she felt dizzy. "Nothing, Mama, I had a bad feeling, thank you." "A bad feeling? At this time of night? Baby, you're scaring me." "I'm fine. I'll be home soon. Maybe an hour. Can you make sure all the doors are locked? All the windows?" "They're already locked, Grace. And don't answer the door for anyone. I don't care who it is, not tonight. Now you're really scaring me. Should I call the police?" "No." The word came out too sharp. Grace forced herself to breathe. "No, Mama, everything's fine. I'm just being paranoid. Long day. I'll explain when I get home." She ended the call before her mother could protest further. Maya was safe. That was the only thing that mattered. Whatever this man wanted, he hadn't hurt her daughter. Yet. The word yet hung in Grace's mind like a guillotine blade. She looked at the address again. 123, West Randolph. She knew that street. It was in the Loop, the heart of downtown Chicago. A commercial district. Office buildings, restaurants, theaters. Not residential. What would be there at midnight on a Tuesday? Grace pulled up the address on her phone's GPS. The map showed a building labeled simply Randolph Tower. A quick search revealed it was a mixed-use building. Retail on the ground floor, offices above. 23 stories. Built in 1989. Nothing particularly notable about it. But which floor? Which office? The card didn't say. "Bring the coins." Grace reached into her pocket and pulled out the $1, $40 in change. 4 quarters, 3 dimes, 2 nickels. She studied them under the dome light. They looked like ordinary coins. No markings. No special mint years. Just everyday pocket change. Why would he want these specific coins? Unless it wasn't about the coins themselves. Unless it was about something else. A symbol. A test. Proof that she'd found the card. That she'd followed instructions. That she was willing to play along. Grace's phone showed 11:04 p.m. 56 minutes. If she went to this meeting, she'd be walking into an unknown situation with a man who'd been stalking her, who knew where she worked, where her daughter went to school. A man who'd demonstrated careful planning and patience. If she didn't go, what would he do? Would he escalate? Would he approach Maya directly? Would he hurt her to punish Grace for not following instructions? The rational part of Grace's brain screamed that this was manipulation. Classic predator behavior. Create fear, then offer a solution that requires the victim to comply with demands. Don't fall for it. Call the police. Get help. But the mother in her, the part that would die before letting anything happen to Maya, knew she didn't have a choice. She had to go. Grace put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot. The rain had eased slightly, but the streets were still slick and dangerous. She drove carefully, automatically, her mind racing through scenarios. Best case, this was some kind of elaborate mistake, a prank, a case of mistaken identity. She'd show up, realize the whole thing was absurd, and go home to laugh about it with her mother. Worst case, she didn't want to think about the worst case. The drive from the parking lot to the loop took 18 minutes through empty streets. Chicago at night was a different creature than Chicago during the day. The crowds and noise gave way to silence and shadows. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement. A few late-night pedestrians hurried past, heads down against the weather. Grace parked in a public garage 3 blocks from Randolph Tower. Her phone showed 11:28 p.m., 32 minutes. She sat in the car, engine running, trying to gather courage. Every instinct told her to drive away, to go home, to lock the doors and call the police and let them handle this. But she thought of Maya sleeping peacefully in her bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Maya, who trusted that her mother would keep her safe. Maya, who'd already lost so much when her father walked away. Grace turned off the engine, pocketed the coins, and stepped out into the night. The walk to Randolph Tower felt surreal, like moving through a dream. Her footsteps echoed off the buildings. A taxi rushed past, spraying water from a puddle. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. She reached the address at 11:41 p.m., 19 minutes early. Randolph Tower was a sleek glass and steel structure, its lobby visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, Grace could see a security desk, a bank of elevators, a few pieces of modern furniture arranged in a waiting area. The lights were on, but the space appeared empty. No, not empty. There was someone at the security desk, a guard in a dark uniform, reading something on a tablet. Grace approached the main entrance. The doors were locked. Of course they were. It was almost midnight. But as she stood there, uncertain what to do next, the guard looked up, saw her, and pressed a button. The lock clicked open. Grace pulled the door and stepped inside. The guard was a man in his 60s with gray hair and a tired expression. His name tag read, Victor. "Evening?" he said. Not particularly friendly, but not hostile either. "You're expected. 23rd floor. Elevator on the right." Grace's mouth went dry. "Expected?" "Yes, ma'am. Your appointment's at midnight, correct?" How did he know? Had the young man called ahead? Made arrangements? Yes, Grace managed. Victor gestured toward the elevators. "Take that one. It's programmed to go directly to 23. Won't stop on any other floors." This was planned. All of it. The man had arranged building access, programmed the elevator, briefed the security guard. This wasn't spontaneous, this was orchestrated. Grace's legs felt weak as she crossed the lobby. The elevator doors stood open, waiting. She stepped inside and turned to face the lobby. Victor had already returned to his tablet, apparently unconcerned about the strange midnight meeting happening on his watch. The doors slid closed. The elevator began to rise. Grace watched the floor numbers climb on the digital display. 3rd floor, 7th floor, 12th floor. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished steel walls. A tired black woman in a cheap windbreaker, wet hair plastered to her head, eyes wide with fear. What was she doing? This was insane. She should get off at the next floor, take the stairs down, run back to her car and drive straight to the nearest police station. But the elevator didn't stop. It rose smoothly, inexorably, toward the 23rd floor, 18th floor, 20th floor, 22nd floor. The elevator chimed softly. 23rd floor. The doors opened onto a dimly lit hallway. Plush carpet, recessed lighting, doors lining both sides, each with a frosted glass panel and company name etched in elegant letters. At the far end of the hallway, one door stood open. Light spilled out into the corridor. Grace stepped out of the elevator. The doors closed behind her with a soft whisper, and suddenly she was alone in the silence. Her phone showed 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes early. She walked slowly down the hallway, her footsteps silent on the carpet. As she approached the open door, she could see it was a conference room. A long table, leather chairs, windows overlooking the city lights, and sitting at the far end of the table exactly as she'd known he would be, was the young man from the restaurant. He smiled as she appeared in the doorway. "Hello, Grace," he said quietly. "Thank you for coming. Please, close the door and have a seat. We have a lot to discuss and not much time." Grace stood frozen in the doorway. Every muscle in her body tensed for flight. The young man sat perfectly still at the end of the conference table, his hands folded in front of him, the same unnervingly calm expression on his face that he'd worn at the restaurant. In the fluorescent light of the office, she could see him more clearly now. Late 20s, as she'd guessed. Sharp features, dark eyes that tracked her movements with clinical precision. "Close the door, Grace," he repeated, his voice soft but carrying an edge that made it clear this was not a request. Her hand moved to the door handle, then stopped. "Not until you tell me what this is about. Not until you tell me why you mentioned my daughter." The man's expression didn't change. "If I wanted to hurt Maya, I wouldn't have needed to bring you here. I would have simply done it. The fact that you're standing in this room, and she's safely asleep in her bed 3 miles away, should tell you that harming your daughter is not my intention." The casual way he said it, the acknowledgement that he knew exactly where Maya was sleeping, made Grace's stomach turn, but there was a terrible logic to his words. If he'd wanted to hurt Maya, he could have. Instead, he'd gone through this elaborate process to get Grace alone. "What do you want?" Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Close the door and sit down. I'll explain everything. You have my word that you'll leave here unharmed and with answers to every question you have. Your word? I don't even know who you are." "No, you don't. Which is why you should close the door and let me introduce myself properly." Grace's mind raced. She could run. The elevator was 30 feet behind her, but Victor, the security guard, was downstairs, clearly in on whatever this was, and the man had demonstrated resources, planning, and knowledge that suggested running wouldn't accomplish much. She stepped into the room and closed the door, but she didn't sit. She stood with her back against the wall, as far from the man as the space would allow, her hand on her phone in her pocket. "If you're thinking of calling the police," the man said, as if reading her mind, "you should know that this room is shielded. No cell signal in or out. It's a standard feature in executive conference rooms. Prevents corporate espionage, unauthorized recordings. Useful for my purposes as well." Grace pulled out her phone. No signal. He was telling the truth. "Sit down, please," he said again. "I know you're frightened. I know this situation is extraordinary, but I'm not your enemy, Grace. In fact, if you hear me out, you'll realize I may be the best friend you've had in years. Friends don't stalk people. Friends don't threaten children. I didn't threaten Maya. I simply demonstrated that I'd done my research, that I'm serious, that I know who you are." He paused. "And who you were." Something in the way he said those last 4 words made Grace's blood run cold. "What does that mean?" "Sit down, and I'll tell you." Against every instinct, Grace walked to the chair at the opposite end of the table from the man and sat. She kept her body angled toward the door, ready to run if needed. The man noticed but said nothing. "My name is Ethan Reeves," he began. "I'm 32 years old. I grew up in Lake Forest, attended Princeton, and currently work as a private investigator. Not the kind you'd find in the yellow pages. The kind wealthy people hire when they want information that's difficult to obtain. Information that requires discretion, resources, and a certain moral flexibility." "You're a stalker for hire," Grace said flatly. Ethan smiled slightly. "That's one way to put it. I prefer to think of myself as someone who finds the truth, regardless of how buried it is. 6 months ago, I was approached by a client, a very wealthy client, someone who wanted me to find information about a specific person, someone who'd disappeared 15 years ago, erased their entire history, and rebuilt their life from scratch." Grace's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. "My client gave me very little to work with, a name that was probably false, a description that could have matched thousands of people, a location that was 15 years out of date, but they were willing to pay extremely well for results. So I took the job." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Grace's face. "It took me 5 months. I tracked down old records, followed dead-end leads, interviewed people who barely remembered anything useful. I used facial recognition software on old photographs. I cross-referenced employment records, school registrations, hospital visits. It was like trying to find a ghost, someone who deliberately erased every trace of their former life." "I don't know what you're talking about," Grace whispered. "Yes, you do." Ethan's voice was gentle but implacable. "You know exactly what I'm talking about, Gabrielle." The name hit Grace like a physical blow, a name she hadn't heard in 15 years, a name she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself it had never existed. Gabrielle Westbrook, the woman she used to be. "How did you—" Grace couldn't finish the sentence. "How did I find you? How did I connect Gabrielle Westbrook, daughter of prominent Denver businessman Marcus Westbrook, to Grace Williams, Single mother working as a server in a Chicago restaurant? It wasn't easy. You did an impressive job disappearing. Changed your name legally, cut off all contact with your family, moved to a city where you had no connections, built a new life from nothing. Ethan pulled a folder from the briefcase sitting beside his chair and slid it across the table toward Grace. She didn't touch it. The break came 3 months ago, he continued. I was searching through old social media data, the kind that's technically deleted but still exists in various backups and caches. I found a photograph from your high school graduation. You were standing with your parents and your younger brother. The caption listed all your names. He tapped the folder. In that photograph, you're wearing a small silver necklace, a delicate chain with a hummingbird pendant. Very distinctive, custom made, according to the jeweler I tracked down in Denver. Your father had it commissioned for your 16th birthday. Grace's hand moved unconsciously to her throat. The necklace was in her jewelry box at home. She never wore it anymore. Too risky, too visible, but she'd never been able to throw it away. The last gift her father had given her before everything fell apart. I ran the image through facial recognition software, Ethan said. Started looking for women in the Chicago area who might match that face 15 years later. The software flagged 47 possible matches. I investigated each one personally. 46 were dead ends. He pointed at Grace. You were number 47, but you'd aged well. Changed your hair, changed your style, changed everything about your external appearance. The software gave you only a 62% probability match. Most investigators would have moved on, but I'm thorough. Grace felt like the room was spinning. 15 years of running, of hiding, of building a new life, all of it unraveling in a conference room at midnight. I visited the Sterling room 3 times before tonight, Ethan continued. Watched you work, studied your mannerisms, the way you move, the way you speak. I needed to be certain, and then 2 weeks ago I was. The scar on your left hand, the one from when you cut yourself on that broken champagne flute at your 18th birthday party. You've been careful to hide it, but it's there. Distinctive, unmistakable. Grace looked down at her hand. The scar was barely visible now, a thin white line across her palm. She'd gotten so used to it she barely noticed it anymore. Once I was certain, I had a decision to make, Ethan said. I could simply report back to my client, give them your current location, your new identity, and collect my fee. Job done. But something bothered me. Why would someone pay this much money to find a woman who disappeared 15 years ago? A woman who clearly went to extreme lengths to not be found. He leaned forward. So I did something I'm not supposed to do. I investigated my client. And what I found made me very, very concerned about what would happen to you if I simply handed over the information. Grace finally found her voice. Who hired you? Someone with a lot to lose if the truth about what happened 15 years ago comes to light. Someone who benefits greatly from you staying hidden, staying silent, staying powerless. Ethan's expression darkened. Someone who, I believe, intends to ensure you never speak about what you know. Permanently. The implications of his words crashed over Grace like a wave. That's why I arranged this meeting, Ethan said. I could have simply approached you at the restaurant or followed you home, but I needed you to understand the gravity of the situation. I needed you to know that I could have hurt Maya if I wanted to, which means others could too. I needed you scared enough to listen. You're trying to help me? Grace's voice dripped with disbelief. By terrorizing me? By threatening my daughter? I'm trying to wake you up, Ethan said firmly. You've been living in a dream for 15 years, Gabrielle, thinking that if you stayed quiet, if you stayed invisible, if you kept your head down, the past would stay buried. But the past never stays buried. And the people you ran from, they haven't forgotten about you. Grace stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You don't know anything about why I left, about what happened. I know more than you think. Ethan opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. He slid it across the table. Grace didn't want to look, but her eyes betrayed her, moving to the image. It was a newspaper clipping, 15 years old. The headline read, Westbrook Industries executive found dead in apparent suicide. The photograph showed a man in his 40s, handsome and confident, wearing an expensive suit. Grace remembered him, could still hear his voice, could still feel his hand on her shoulder at that company Christmas party, the way it had lingered just a little too long. Richard Hastings, her father's business partner, her father's best friend, the man she'd found in his office that night, blood pooling around his head, a gun on the floor beside him. The man who'd died 3 hours after she'd confronted him. They ruled it suicide. Ethan said quietly. The police closed the case. Your father gave a tearful statement about his friend's hidden depression. Everyone moved on. Except you. You disappeared 2 weeks later. Changed your name. Vanished. I didn't kill him, Grace whispered. I didn't. I know. I've seen the police reports, the forensics, the timeline. You couldn't have killed him. You were at a friend's house during the estimated time of death. You had an alibi. Ethan paused. But you knew something. You know something. Something important enough that you ran instead of staying. Something important enough that someone wants to make sure you never talk. Grace's legs felt weak. She sank back into the chair, her mind reeling. 3 days ago, Ethan said, my client contacted me again, asked if I'd made progress. I told them I was close. They offered to triple my fee if I could deliver results within the week. He pulled out another photograph. Then I did something else I shouldn't have done. I hired my own investigator to look into my client's recent activities, and I found this. The second photograph showed a young woman, maybe 20 years old, walking across a college campus. She had long dark hair and a bright smile, books clutched to her chest. Her name is Jessica Chen, Ethan said. She's a junior at Northwestern University, pre-law, excellent student, completely ordinary life. Except for one thing, 2 months ago she started asking questions about Westbrook Industries, about Richard Hastings' death, about what really happened 15 years ago. Grace's breath caught. She's writing her undergraduate thesis on corporate corruption and cover-ups, Ethan continued. Apparently her father worked as an accountant at Westbrook Industries back then. He died in a car accident 6 years ago, but before he died, he told Jessica that Richard Hastings didn't kill himself, that there was something wrong with the official story. He tapped the photograph. Jessica Chen went missing 4 days ago. Her roommate filed a police report. Her parents are frantic. The university is investigating. But I know the truth, Grace. And so do you if you're willing to admit it. What truth? Grace's voice was barely a whisper. That whoever killed Richard Hastings 15 years ago is still out there, still powerful, still willing to kill to protect their secrets. Ethan locked eyes with Grace. And they've just realized that there are 2 people who might know the truth. Jessica Chen, who was asking too many questions. And you, Gabrielle Westbrook, who was there the night it happened. The conference room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Jessica is already gone, Ethan said quietly. You're next, unless we do something about it. Grace felt tears burning in her eyes. 15 years. 15 years of running, of hiding, of trying to protect Maya from a past that wouldn't stay buried. What do you want from me? She asked finally. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the 4 quarters, 3 dimes, and 2 nickels that Grace had brought from the restaurant. He'd retrieved them somehow. She didn't even remember giving them to him. These coins, he said, arranging them on the table in the same neat pyramid pattern he'd used at the Sterling Room, represent $140, the exact amount that Richard Hastings left as a tip the last time he ate at the restaurant where you used to work. The restaurant where you were working the night he died. Grace stared at the coins. She'd forgotten that detail, had buried it along with everything else. You told the police you didn't see Richard that night, Ethan said, that you hadn't spoken to him. But that was a lie, wasn't it? He came to the restaurant, he left you a message. And whatever that message was, it's the reason you went to his office later. It's the reason you were one of the last people to see him alive. He pushed the coins toward her. I need you to remember, Grace. I need you to tell me what really happened that night. Because somewhere in that memory is the key to everything. The key to who killed Richard Hastings. The key to who's killing people now, and the key to keeping you and Maya safe. Grace picked up one of the quarters, her hands shaking. The metal was cold against her skin, and suddenly she was 22 years old again, working the dinner shift at Giovanni's in downtown Denver, watching Richard Hastings leave these exact coins on the table with something else, something small, something she'd thought was trash and almost thrown away, until she'd looked closer. He left me a flash drive, Grace whispered, hidden under the coins, disguised to look like a decorative keychain. I didn't notice it until I was clearing the table. Ethan leaned forward, every muscle in his body tense. What was on the drive? I don't know. I never looked. I was going to throw it away, but then... Grace closed her eyes, the memories flooding back. Richard called the restaurant, asked to speak to me. He sounded scared, desperate. He said he'd made a mistake leaving it there, that I needed to destroy it immediately, that if anyone found out I had it, I'd be in danger. But you didn't destroy it. No, I went to his office to give it back. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought... Her voice broke. When I got there, the door was open. He was on the floor. There was so much blood, I ran. I just ran. And 2 weeks later, when the police closed the case and everyone said it was suicide, I knew something was wrong. I knew someone had killed him. So I left. I disappeared. I've been running ever since." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question Grace had been dreading. "Grace, do you still have the flash drive?" She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, and slowly, she nodded. Ethan Reeves stared at Grace across the conference table, his expression unreadable. The admission hung in the air between them like smoke. 15 years of running, 15 years of fear, and the answer had been with her the entire time. "Where is it?" His voice was carefully controlled, but Grace could hear the urgency beneath. "Safe, hidden, somewhere no one would think to look." Grace wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I've moved it 3 times over the years, every time I changed apartments, every time I thought someone might be getting close." "You've had it this entire time and never looked at what's on it?" "I was 22 years old and terrified," Grace shot back. "A man was dead. The police were asking questions. My father—" She stopped, her throat tightening. "My father told me to leave Denver, gave me cash and told me to disappear, said it was for my own safety, that the people involved in Richard's death wouldn't hesitate to hurt me if they thought I knew anything." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Your father told you to run?" "He said Richard had gotten involved with dangerous people, that there were things happening at Westbrook Industries that I didn't understand, that if I valued my life, I'd leave and never come back." Grace's voice dropped to a whisper. "I thought he was protecting me. Now I'm not so sure." "Did your father know about the flash drive?" "No, I never told him. I never told anyone." Grace looked down at the coins on the table. "Until now." Ethan stood and walked to the windows overlooking Chicago's glittering skyline. Rain streaked the glass, distorting the city lights into abstract patterns. He was silent for a long moment, his hands clasped behind his back. "My client," he said finally, "is someone with deep connections to your father's company, someone who stood to gain a great deal from Richard Hastings' death, someone who's been very, very careful over the past 15 years to ensure that certain information never comes to light." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. "Who?" Ethan turned to face her. "I think you know, Grace. You've always known. You just haven't wanted to admit it." The words hit her like a punch to the gut, because he was right. Deep down, beneath all the lies she'd told herself, beneath all the justifications and rationalizations, she'd known. She'd known since the night her father handed her that envelope of cash and told her to disappear. She'd known from the look in his eyes, not fear for her safety, but fear of what she might know. "My father," she whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. "Marcus Westbrook, your father. The man who built Westbrook Industries from nothing. The man who couldn't let his business partner's conscience destroy everything he'd created." Grace stood abruptly, the chair clattering backward. "You're wrong. My father wouldn't. He couldn't he?" Ethan's voice was gentle but relentless. "Think about it, Grace. Really think. Richard Hastings was your father's partner for 20 years. They built that company together. And then something happened. Something that made Richard so desperate he encrypted evidence on a flash drive and passed it to you, his partner's daughter, during a dinner shift. Why would he do that unless he couldn't trust anyone else at the company? Unless he knew the threat came from inside?" Grace's mind raced through memories she'd spent 15 years trying to forget. Her father and Richard at company picnics, laughing together. Her father and Richard signing contracts, celebrating deals. Her father and Richard arguing in hushed voices at her 18th birthday party, stepping out onto the terrace when they thought no one was listening. What were they fighting about? Grace murmured, more to herself than to Ethan. "What?" "At my birthday party. My father and Richard had an argument. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but Richard looked upset, angry. He kept shaking his head, and my father kept putting his hand on Richard's shoulder, like he was trying to calm him down." Grace met Ethan's eyes. That was 3 months before Richard died. Ethan pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times. 3 months before his death, Westbrook Industries secured its largest government contract ever, defense systems manufacturing, worth over $300 million. It made your father very wealthy, very powerful. "I remember," Grace said quietly. "There was a big celebration, champagne, speeches. My father was so happy." Was Richard happy? Grace thought back. No, he wasn't. He gave a short speech at the celebration, but he looked troubled. I remember thinking he seemed sick, pale, distracted, because he'd just found out how your father secured that contract, Ethan said. I've spent the last 2 weeks digging through old records, financial statements, congressional testimonies. There were rumors at the time, whispers about bribes, about falsified safety reports, about corners cut in the manufacturing process, but nothing was ever proven. The investigation went nowhere, because Richard had the proof. Grace breathed. Whatever's on that flash drive, it's evidence of what my father did to get that contract. Ethan nodded. And Richard Hastings, good man that he was, couldn't live with it. Couldn't be complicit in fraud and corruption and potentially putting soldiers' lives at risk with faulty equipment. So he gathered evidence, planned to go to the authorities, but he needed insurance first. Needed to make sure the truth would come out even if something happened to him. So he gave it to me. Grace sank back into her chair, feeling dizzy. He trusted me. He trusted that you were young enough, innocent enough, removed enough from the company that you wouldn't be suspected of having anything important. You were just a waitress. Marcus Westbrook's daughter, yes, but estranged from the family business. Working service jobs, going to community college. No one would think Richard would give you sensitive information, but my father figured it out. The pieces were clicking into place now, each one more horrifying than the last. After Richard died, after the police ruled it suicide, my father came to my apartment, asked me questions, asked if Richard had contacted me, if he'd given me anything. And what did you tell him? I lied, said I hadn't seen Richard in weeks, hadn't talked to him. Grace's hands were shaking again. He seemed relieved. He hugged me, told me he loved me. Then 2 days later, he showed up with the money and told me to run. Ethan crossed his arms, because even though you'd lied convincingly, he couldn't be sure, couldn't risk that Richard had given you something. So he got you out of Denver, out of the way, where you couldn't talk to investigators or journalists or anyone else who might ask questions. He sent me away to protect himself, Grace said, the realization crushing her. Not to protect me. Your father is a careful man. He couldn't kill you. You're his daughter, and your death would raise too many questions. But he could make you disappear, keep you isolated, keep you scared. As long as you stayed hidden and silent, you weren't a threat. For 15 years. Until Jessica Chen started asking questions. Until the past started threatening to surface again. Ethan returned to his seat. Your father realized he had a problem. A college student digging into old records was manageable. He could make her disappear without much fuss. But what if she talked to people? What if she'd shared her research? He needed to know how much damage control was necessary. So he hired you to find me, Grace said. To see if I was involved. To see if I'd been in contact with Jessica. Exactly. And when I reported back that I'd found you, living quietly in Chicago under a new name, working as a server, raising a daughter alone, he knew you hadn't been helping Jessica. You were still running, still scared, still silent. Ethan paused, which meant you were still useful as long as you stayed that way. Grace felt sick. And if I didn't stay that way, then you'd have an accident, just like Richard Hastings' suicide, just like the car crash that killed Jessica Chen's father, just like whatever happened to Jessica herself. Ethan's expression hardened. Your father has been cleaning up loose ends for 15 years, Grace. And now that the past is resurfacing, he's going to clean up every single person who might threaten his empire, including me, including you, and possibly Maya, if he thinks she might know something. The words sent a bolt of pure terror through Grace's chest. Maya doesn't know anything. She's 11 years old. She doesn't even know my real name. Your father doesn't know that. All he knows is that you've been alive for 15 years with potential evidence of his crimes. He can't take the risk that you haven't told your daughter, that you haven't hidden copies, that you haven't made contingency plans. Grace stood again, pacing now, her mind spinning. What am I supposed to do? Go to the police? With what? A flash drive I've never even looked at? Accusations against one of Denver's most prominent businessmen based on 15-year-old suspicions? No, Ethan said firmly. You don't go to the police. Not yet. Not until we know what's on that drive and have a strategy for how to use it without getting you killed. We? Grace stopped pacing. Why are you helping me? You were hired to find me, to report back to my father. Why betray your client? Ethan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. Because I have a sister. She's 27. She trusts me to protect her. If someone ever threatened her, if someone ever put her in danger, he met Grace's eyes. I'd want someone to help her, even if it meant breaking the rules, even if it cost them something. So this is about your sister? This is about doing the right thing, something I haven't always been great at. Ethan's expression was rueful. I've spent years digging up people's secrets for money, helping the powerful stay powerful, turning blind eyes to the damage my investigations cause. When I realized what your father was really after, when I understood that finding you meant potentially signing your death warrant, I couldn't do it. I couldn't be responsible for that. Grace studied his face, looking for deception, for manipulation, but all she saw was genuine conviction. How do I know I can trust you? She asked quietly. You don't. But right now I'm the only person who knows your real identity, knows what your father is planning, and wants to help you instead of hurt you. That has to count for something. He had a point. Grace was trapped between impossible choices. Trust a man she just met or face her father's resources and ruthlessness alone. What's your plan? She asked finally. Ethan pulled a small device from his pocket. It looked like a thumb drive but more sophisticated, with a small screen and several buttons. First, we look at what's on Richard Hastings' flash drive. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Then we make copies, multiple copies, and store them in different locations. Safe deposit boxes, cloud storage with delayed release protocols, lawyers' offices with instructions to release the contents if anything happens to you. And then we go public. But strategically, we don't just dump the information and hope for the best. We coordinate with journalists, federal investigators, congressional committees. We build an airtight case that your father can't bribe or threaten his way out of. We make sure the truth comes out in a way that protects you and Maya. Grace wanted to believe it could work, wanted to believe that after 15 years of running she could finally stop, finally be free. But she'd learned long ago that hope was dangerous. My father has a lot of money, she said. A lot of connections, senators, judges, police chiefs. He's been building those relationships for decades. How do we fight that? We use the one thing he can't control, the truth. Once it's out, once it's public, he can't make it disappear. He can hire the best lawyers in the country, but he can't erase evidence. He can't unring that bell. He can kill us, Grace pointed out, before we get the chance to go public. Which is why we move fast, and why you don't go home tonight. Grace's heart skipped. What? Your father knows I found you. He's expecting a report. When I don't give him one, when he realizes I've gone dark, he's going to assume I've either failed or betrayed him. Either way, he'll send someone else. Someone who won't have my crisis of conscience. I have to go home. Maya is safe for now, Ethan interrupted. Your father won't move against her until he knows for certain that you're a threat. He'll watch, he'll wait, but he won't act. Not yet. You can't know that. I know how men like your father think. They're cautious, methodical. He'll want to find you first. Talk to you. Determine what you know and what you might have told others. Only if he can't find you or if you prove to be a direct threat, will he escalate to violence. Grace thought of Maya, asleep in her bed, trusting that her mother would come home, trusting that the world was safe. I can't just disappear, she said. Maya will be terrified. My mother, call them. From a payphone, not your cell. Tell them you have to leave town for a few days. Work emergency. Whatever story makes sense. But you can't go back to that house tonight, Grace. It's not safe. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to run home, to grab her daughter, to protect her physically. But logic, cold, hard logic, told her Ethan was right. If she went home now, she'd be leading danger straight to Maya's door. Where would I go? She asked. I have a place, a safe house I use for clients who need to disappear temporarily. It's off the grid, no paper trail. Your father won't be able to find it. And Maya? Once we've secured the evidence, once we've made the arrangements, we'll bring her somewhere safe too. Somewhere your father can't reach her. But first, we need that flash drive. Grace closed her eyes, weighing impossible options. Trust Ethan and potentially walk into a trap. Or go home and potentially lead her father's people straight to her family. There was no good choice, only different versions of risk. Okay, she said finally, opening her eyes. Okay, I'll get the flash drive, but we do this my way. We protect Maya first. Everything else is secondary. Ethan nodded. Agreed. And if anything happens to me, if your plan fails, if my father finds us, you get Maya out, you keep her safe, that's the deal. You have my word. Grace didn't know if his word meant anything, but it was all she had. The flash drive is in a storage unit, she said. South side, under a false name. I can get it tomorrow. Not tomorrow, now. Tonight. We can't wait. The storage facility is closed. It doesn't open until 6 a.m. Ethan smiled slightly. That's what locks are for. I'm very good at getting into places I'm not supposed to be. Of course he was. Grace stood, feeling the weight of the decision settle onto her shoulders. 15 years of hiding were about to end. One way or another, the truth was coming out. She just hoped she'd live to see it. There's one more thing, Ethan said as they moved toward the door. Your father is expecting me to report in tomorrow morning. When I don't, he's going to know something's wrong. We'll have maybe 24 hours before he starts looking for both of us. Maybe less. 24 hours to get the evidence, make copies, and go public, Grace said. That's not much time. No, Ethan agreed. It's not. They left the conference room and walked to the elevator. As they descended toward the lobby, Grace thought about the last 15 years. The lies, the fear, the constant looking over her shoulder. And she thought about Maya, beautiful, innocent Maya who deserved better than a mother living in terror. Whatever happened next, Grace was done running. The elevator doors opened. Victor, the security guard, looked up from his tablet, nodded at them without interest, and returned to his reading. They walked out into the rainy Chicago night. And somewhere across the city, in a mansion in Lake Forest, Marcus Westbrook sat in his study, staring at his phone, waiting for a call from his investigator. A call that would never come. The storage facility was a grim concrete structure on the south side, surrounded by chain-link fence and security cameras that probably hadn't worked in years. At 2:47 a.m., the parking lot was empty except for Grace's Honda and Ethan's sleek black sedan. Rain continued to fall, lighter now but steady, turning the cracked asphalt into a minefield of puddles. Grace stood at the entrance, her hands shaking as she punched in the access code. The keypad beeped, and the gate rolled open with a metallic screech that seemed impossibly loud in the pre-dawn silence. Unit 247, she said quietly. Second floor, back corner. They moved through the maze of corridors, past rows of identical orange doors, their footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. The facility smelled of rust and mildew and forgotten things. Grace had chosen this place specifically because it was cheap, anonymous, and the kind of location where no one asked questions. She'd rented the unit under the name Sarah Martinez 7 years ago, paying cash annually, never missing a payment. Inside were boxes of old photographs, clothes Maya had outgrown, and buried at the bottom of a container labeled winter blankets. A small fireproof safe. Grace knelt in front of the safe, her fingers trembling as she worked the combination. Behind her, Ethan stood watch, his eyes scanning the corridor, alert for any sign they'd been followed. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside, wrapped in a plastic bag and sealed with tape, was a small object that had dictated the course of her entire adult life. Grace pulled it out, feeling the weight of it in her palm. It looked so innocuous, just a flash drive shaped like a miniature book, the kind of novelty item you could buy at any electronics store. But Richard Hastings had died because of what was on this drive. Jessica Chen had disappeared because of it. And if Ethan was right, Grace's own father had spent 15 years ensuring it stayed buried. Is that it? Ethan asked. Grace nodded, unable to speak. Then let's get out of here. We need to see what's on it. 20 minutes later, they were in Ethan's safe house, a nondescript apartment in Lincoln Park with reinforced doors, security cameras, and windows with steel shutters. It was furnished sparingly. A couch, a table, a few chairs. The walls were bare. It felt temporary, like a place designed for people passing through on their way to somewhere else. Ethan set up a laptop on the table, connecting it to a portable hard drive and several backup devices. Before we open this, I'm going to create an air-gapped environment, he explained. If there's any kind of tracking software or malware embedded in the files, it won't be able to phone home. Grace watched as he worked, her mind racing. In a few minutes, she'd finally know what Richard Hastings had died to protect, what her father had killed to conceal. Ready, Ethan said finally. He looked at Grace. You should be the one to open it. She moved to the laptop, inserted the flash drive, and waited while the computer recognized the device. A folder appeared on the screen, labeled simply, Westbrook, Evidence. Grace double-clicked. Inside were dozens of files, spreadsheets, PDFs, scanned documents, audio recordings, video files. Richard had been thorough. 15 years ago, he'd compiled a comprehensive record of everything he'd discovered. Grace opened the first document, a PDF titled Overview PDF. It was a letter written by Richard Hastings and dated 3 days before his death. If you're reading this, then something has happened to me. I pray that's not the case, but I've learned enough about Marcus Westbrook to know that he won't allow the truth to come out peacefully. This drive contains evidence of systematic fraud, corruption, and criminal negligence at Westbrook Industries. Specifically, it documents how Marcus secured the FY 2009 Defense Systems manufacturing contract through bribery of federal officials and falsification of safety test results. The components manufactured under this contract were installed in military vehicles deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. They were defective, they failed under combat conditions, and soldiers died as a result. I discovered this by accident while reviewing quarterly financial reports. Discrepancies in the R&D budget led me to offshore accounts. Those accounts led me to payments made to DoD officials. Those payments led me to the testing facility where I found evidence that Marcus had ordered engineers to falsify safety certifications. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He said it was necessary, that the company would have gone bankrupt without that contract, that a few isolated equipment failures were acceptable losses compared to the jobs and economic growth Westbrook Industries provided. I told him I couldn't be part of this, that I was going to the authorities. He begged me to reconsider, offered me money, threatened me. When I refused, he said he'd do whatever necessary to protect the company. I'm scared, but I can't live with this secret. The families of those soldiers deserve to know the truth. The public deserves to know that their tax dollars funded equipment that killed the people it was supposed to protect. If you're reading this, please, make sure the truth comes out. Don't let Marcus Westbrook get away with this. Richard Hastings. Grace's hands were shaking so badly she could barely move the mouse. She opened the next file. It was a spreadsheet detailing payments totaling over $6 million to 3 Department of Defense officials, complete with bank account numbers and transaction dates. The next file was a video. Grace clicked play. The footage was grainy, clearly filmed with a hidden camera. It showed an office, her father's office at Westbrook Industries. 2 men sat across from each other, Marcus Westbrook, and a man Grace didn't recognize. Her father's voice came through clearly. The test results can't be accurate. If we report these failure rates, we lose the contract. The other man shifted uncomfortably. Marcus, I can't falsify federal safety certifications. That's fraud. If anyone finds out, no one will find out. You'll submit modified results. I'll make sure you're compensated appropriately. I could lose my engineering license, go to prison, or you could become very wealthy and help build something important. Your choice, David. The video ended. Grace opened file after file, each one more damning than the last. Test results showing catastrophic failure rates, emails discussing how to conceal defects, photographs of faulty components, audio recordings of her father instructing employees to destroy evidence, and most devastating of all, a document from the Department of Defense listing casualties attributed to equipment failure. 37 names. 37 soldiers who died because the vehicles they'd been riding in had malfunctioned due to defective Westbrook Industries components. 37 families destroyed because Marcus Westbrook valued profit over human life. Grace pushed away from the laptop and stumbled to the bathroom where she vomited until there was nothing left. When she emerged, pale and shaking, Ethan handed her a glass of water. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I know he's your father. He's a murderer. Grace's voice was hollow. 37 people, 37 soldiers, and he didn't care. The money was more important. Yes, and Richard tried to stop him, tried to do the right thing. So my father had him killed and made it look like suicide. Ethan nodded. There's an audio file, the last one in the folder. You should listen to it. Grace didn't want to, but she'd come this far. She returned to the laptop and opened the file. Richard Hastings's voice filled the room, strained and frightened. Marcus, please. We've been friends for 20 years, partners. I'm begging you. Her father's voice, cold and detached. You're going to destroy everything I've built, everything we've built. We built it on lies, on blood. We built it on ambition, on the willingness to do what's necessary, something you've apparently lost. I won't let you get away with this. I'm going to the FBI tomorrow. I have evidence, copies. If anything happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you, Richard. You're going to go home tonight, and you're going to think very carefully about the consequences of your actions. And tomorrow, you're going to realize that turning me in means destroying yourself too. You signed those contracts, you approved those payments. You're as complicit as I am. That's why I'm willing to face the consequences. Can you say the same? There was a long silence. Then her father's voice, soft and sad. I'm sorry, old friend. I truly am. The recording ended. Grace sat motionless, tears streaming down her face. That conversation had taken place hours before Richard's death. Her father had said goodbye to his best friend, knowing what he was about to do. We have everything we need. Ethan said. "This is enough to bring him down. To get justice for those soldiers and their families. For Richard, for Jessica Chen, and for me," Grace whispered. "For the 15 years he stole from me." Ethan began making copies of the files, transferring them to multiple drives, uploading encrypted versions to secure cloud servers. While he worked, Grace sat on the couch, staring at nothing, trying to process the magnitude of what she'd learned. Her father wasn't just corrupt, he was evil, and she'd spent her entire life never knowing. At 4:23 a.m., Grace's phone rang. She'd turned it back on to call her mother earlier before they'd gone to the storage unit. Now the screen showed unknown number. She answered. "Hello? Gabrielle." Her father's voice. Warm, familiar. The voice that had read her bedtime stories when she was little. "It's been a long time." Grace's blood turned to ice. "How did you get this number?" "I've always known where you were, sweetheart. I've been watching over you all these years, making sure you were safe." "Watching over me? You sent me away. You made me disappear. I protected you from the consequences of Richard's foolishness, from people who would have hurt you to get to me." Marcus Westbrook's voice remained gentle, almost paternal. "And I'm calling now to protect you again. I don't need your protection. You do, actually. You've made some very poor decisions tonight, Gabrielle. Trusting Ethan Reeves. Opening files you should have destroyed years ago. These are dangerous choices." Grace's heart hammered. "How do you know?" "I know everything, sweetheart. I know you went to the storage facility at 2:47 a.m. I know you retrieved a flash drive. I know you're currently at an apartment in Lincoln Park with Mr. Reeves." He paused. "And I know Maya is asleep at your mother's house, completely unguarded." The threat was unmistakable. "If you touch her," Grace's voice shook with rage, "I would never hurt my granddaughter. She's innocent in all this, but I need you to understand that I'm prepared to do whatever necessary to protect my legacy, just as I did with Richard, just as I did with Jessica Chen and her father, just as I'll do with Ethan Reeves if he continues to interfere." "You killed them," Grace said. "All of them. And you're going to prison for it." Her father sighed. "No, Gabrielle, I'm not. Because you're going to destroy those files. You're going to send Mr. Reeves away, and you're going to continue living your quiet life in Chicago, raising your daughter, staying silent, just as you've done for 15 years. And if I don't, then I'll be forced to protect myself. Maya will have an accident. Nothing traceable to me, of course. Perhaps a house fire, perhaps a car crash, perhaps she'll simply disappear, like Jessica Chen." His voice remained calm, almost conversational. "I don't want to do this, sweetheart, but I will, you know I will." Grace looked at Ethan, who'd been listening to the conversation through a speaker. His expression was grim. "I have copies," Grace said. "Multiple copies, hidden in different locations. If anything happens to me or Maya, I'm sure you think you do, but I've been planning contingencies for 15 years, Gabrielle. I have resources you can't imagine. People who can find anything, destroy anything, kill anyone. Do you really want to test that against your daughter's life?" Grace closed her eyes. This was the moment, the choice that would define everything that came next. She could surrender, destroy the evidence, keep Maya safe, spend the rest of her life knowing that 37 families would never get justice, that her father would continue profiting from murder, that evil had won, or she could fight, risk everything, trust that the truth was stronger than her father's money and connections, trust that justice was possible. She thought of Richard Hastings, who'd died trying to do the right thing, of Jessica Chen, who'd disappeared asking questions, of 37 soldiers who'd never come home, and she thought of Maya, who deserved to grow up in a world where the truth mattered, where people like Marcus Westbrook faced consequences. Grace opened her eyes. "No," she said quietly. "What?" "I said no. I'm not destroying the evidence, I'm not staying silent, and you're not going to hurt Maya, because if anything happens to her, anything at all, these files go to every news organization in the country, to the FBI, to the Department of Defense, to Congress. I've already set up dead man switches. If I don't check in every 12 hours, everything goes public automatically." It was a bluff. They hadn't set up any such system yet. But her father didn't know that. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You're making a mistake, Gabrielle." Her father's voice had lost its warmth. Now it was cold, hard, dangerous. "A mistake you'll regret. Maybe. But at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. Can you say the same?" She hung up. For a moment, the apartment was silent. Then Ethan spoke. "That was either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both," Grace admitted. "How fast can you set up those dead man switches? Because that was a bluff, and if he calls it, already on it, I started setting them up while you were talking." Ethan's fingers flew across the keyboard. "We'll have basic protocols in place within an hour, full redundancy by morning. And Maya, I'm sending people I trust to your mother's house right now. Former military. Good people. They'll watch the place, make sure no one gets close." Grace felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders, but she knew this was far from over. "What now?" she asked. "Now we go on offense. We don't wait for your father to make his move. We strike first." Ethan pulled up a contact list on his phone. "I have relationships with investigative journalists at the Washington Post and New York Times. People who've been trying to nail corrupt defense contractors for years. We give them everything. Tonight. And we give it to the FBI simultaneously. We flood the zone with so much information that your father can't possibly contain it all. He'll deny everything. Hire lawyers. Claim the evidence is fabricated. Let him. The evidence is overwhelming. Audio recordings in his own voice. Financial records. Testimony from the engineers he bribed. Once the investigation starts, other people will come forward. People who've been too scared to speak up. That's how these things work. One person breaks the dam and everyone else follows." Grace thought about it. About all the employees at Westbrook Industries who must have known something was wrong, who'd stayed silent out of fear or loyalty or self-preservation. People just like her. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." Over the next 6 hours, as dawn broke over Chicago and the rain finally stopped, Grace Williams, Gabrielle Westbrook, told her story. To journalists, to FBI agents, to federal prosecutors. She turned over the flash drive, provided testimony, answered hundreds of questions. And with each word she felt lighter, freer, like she was finally shedding a weight she'd been carrying for 15 years. At 11:34 a.m. the first story broke. The Washington Post's headline read, "Defense contractor accused of fraud and cover-up in soldier deaths." By noon, it was everywhere. Cable news, social media, international outlets. The story spread like wildfire. A wealthy businessman who'd bribed officials, falsified safety tests, and caused the deaths of American soldiers, then covered it up for 15 years. Marcus Westbrook's carefully constructed empire began to crumble within hours. The stock price of Westbrook Industries crashed. Board members resigned. Government officials named in the documents were suspended pending investigation. The FBI raided the company headquarters, hauling away boxes of evidence. And at 3:47 p.m., federal agents arrested Marcus Westbrook at his Lake Forest mansion, charging him with fraud, bribery, manslaughter, and murder in the death of Richard Hastings. Grace watched the arrest on television, sitting in Ethan's safe house apartment. Her father was led out in handcuffs, surrounded by agents, as cameras captured every moment. He looked older than she remembered, smaller, just a man after all, not the untouchable titan she'd feared for so long. "It's over," Ethan said quietly. Grace shook her head. "No, the trial will take years. He'll fight every charge, hire the best lawyers. Some charges might not stick, but the truth is out. That's what matters." He was right. Whatever happened in court, the world now knew what Marcus Westbrook had done. The families of those 37 soldiers knew. Richard Hastings' name was cleared. Jessica Chen's parents had answers. And Grace, Gabrielle, whoever she was now, had finally stopped running. Her phone rang. It was her mother. "Baby, are you watching the news? They're saying your father. They're saying he..." Her mother's voice broke. "Is it true?" "Yes, Mama. It's all true." "Oh, God. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. All these years, if I'd known..." "You couldn't have known. He hid it from everyone." "Are you safe? Is Maya safe?" "We're safe. Ethan has people watching the house, and once the trial starts, we'll probably be put in protective custody. Witness protection, maybe." "Witness protection? Baby, what have you done?" Grace smiled sadly. The right thing. Finally. That evening, Grace returned home for the first time since leaving for her shift at the Sterling Room. It felt like weeks ago, though it had been less than 24 hours. Ethan's security team swept the house, checking for threats, and then gave the all clear. Maya was in the living room watching cartoons, oblivious to the chaos swirling around her. When she saw Grace, she jumped up and ran over, wrapping her arms around her mother's waist. "Mom, where were you? Grandma said you had to work late, but you never work that late, and I was worried and..." "I'm sorry, baby, I'm sorry I scared you." Grace held her daughter tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "But everything's okay now. Everything's going to be okay. Promise? Grace thought about the trial ahead, the media attention, the possibility of relocating, the long road to rebuilding a life not built on lies and fear. I promise, she said. It might be hard for a while. Things might change, but we're going to be okay. We're going to be free. Maya pulled back, looking up at her mother with serious eyes. Mom, why are you crying? Grace touched her face and realized tears were streaming down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of relief. Because I'm happy, sweetheart, she said. For the first time in a very long time, I'm actually happy. 6 months later, the trial of Marcus Westbrook dominated headlines for months. Grace testified for 3 days, describing what she'd witnessed, what she'd known, and how she'd lived in fear for 15 years. Ethan testified about being hired to find her and what he'd discovered about Marcus's intentions. Other witnesses came forward, just as Ethan had predicted. Engineers who'd falsified tests, accountants who'd hidden payments, employees who'd suspected the truth but been too frightened to speak. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus Westbrook was convicted on 17 counts, including fraud, bribery, manslaughter, and conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. At 68 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. Westbrook Industries declared bankruptcy. The families of the 37 soldiers who died received settlements totaling over $200 million. It wasn't justice. Nothing could bring back their loved ones. But it was acknowledgement, recognition that their deaths mattered. Richard Hastings was posthumously honored for his courage. A scholarship was established in his name for engineering students committed to ethical practices. Jessica Chen's body was found in a quarry outside Detroit. Her killer, a man hired by Marcus Westbrook, confessed in exchange for a reduced sentence. Jessica's parents finally had closure. And Grace? She testified at her father's trial, looked him in the eye, and told the truth. When he was led away in handcuffs, she felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a quiet sense that a chapter had closed. She kept her job at the Sterling Room. The restaurant's owners had been supportive throughout the trial, and Grace found comfort in the familiar routine, in being useful, in serving others with dignity. Maya adjusted better than expected. She was confused at first, about the media attention, about why her grandfather was in prison, about why they had to talk to so many lawyers and agents. But children are resilient, and Grace answered her questions honestly, age-appropriately, helping her understand that sometimes people make terrible choices and those choices have consequences. Ethan Reeves became a friend. Not romantic, Grace wasn't ready for that, might never be, but someone she trusted, someone who called every few weeks to check in, someone who'd proven that doing the right thing mattered, even when it was hard. On a Tuesday evening in late spring, Grace stood on the back porch of her mother's house, watching Maya play in the yard with the neighbor's dog. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Washington Post just published a follow-up. Reforms being proposed in defense contract oversight. Your testimony made a difference. Grace smiled and pocketed the phone. She'd spent 15 years invisible, hiding, running, pretending to be someone else. Now she was just Grace Williams, a mother, a server, a woman who'd found the courage to speak truth to power and survived. And that, she thought, watching her daughter laugh in the fading light, was enough. More than enough, it was everything.